Rich, today we're getting into AI and cake. You wouldn't think that they go together, but I know that you're about to break it down for everybody.
I find that hard to believe that you somehow don't see a connection between AI and cake.
This is Body by Cake, baby. Give me all that sugar. Let's go.
Welcome to the show, where AI takes the floor. Lee and Rich on the mic.
Welcome to the AI Guys podcast, where we make artificial intelligence easy to understand for everyone. I'm your host, Lee Dixon, and as always, I'm joined by Sarasota, Florida's favorite swire, Rich Swire.
I am number one, 10 years in holding.
Don't tell Asunta or anybody else.
Yeah, I think my wife probably takes the number one spot more than I do. But thank you for
just because she's more social than you are, I think.
Yeah, I just don't like people. I don't know if people get that vibe from me, but I just got to sit in my little cube here and
Yeah, getting your message on Instagram this morning and seeing it like 6 a.m. like up and at it. I was just like, oh man, time change aside, this man is going hard.
I was excited to get to work today. We got some cool projects happening. So
we do, and we got a lot of stuff to cover today. And I actually wanted our topics today to focus around where a lot of our conversations would be going. So today we're going to be diving into AI architecture and why it matters early in the business process. So really, there's kind of four core pieces that I feel like we've broken it down to, with foundational models, the connection layer, the AI agent management process or platform in this sense, and then like that user interface and why that matters. So we're going to touch on a couple things in there, but let's start just on a brief overview on that foundational model and the role of choosing the right one early on, just to get everyone primed for this.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about this in past episodes, but I think today, the goal is to kind of dig a little bit deeper, because we get a lot of questions around the technology stack, some of the gotchas, some of the things that we've learned over the years. So I think today's episode is going to be pretty much focused on, hey, if you're going to build out or deploy AI, these are some things you definitely need to earmark some time to think about. Because obviously we've covered all of this in past episodes at a high level, but I think today's focus is really to dig a little bit deeper, because we've gotten a lot of requests for that, and also it's almost every conversation we have with new customers. So I think it's a good thing to cover. So so I kind of like looking at it like a cake. Think about a 4-layered cake, and the first layer, which we'll just call the foundation, is I think pretty much solely focused on building out your model, your actual foundation, whether choosing your own foundational model. If you're doing a general type application, you can use OpenAI or Google Gemini or Llama from Facebook, but picking that baseline model. And then also, if you want to do some custom model stuff, you could also throw in some things like Pinecone or some other vector databases on top of that. But it's very much like in the app world, when you're building apps for those developers who are building mobile apps or web apps, it's pretty much choosing your database is kind of how I look at it. And it has a very similar decision-making process. A lot of people use databases like MySQL or Postgres because it works better with different types of applications. It also happens to be free for the most part, as open source, versus like a MS SQL, Microsoft SQL might be something that a corporation buys because it has a much more robust support infrastructure with Microsoft, but obviously has a cost to it. So you could look at the models in that same light, because they all are pretty much, I think, converging into a very similar behavior in the way that they deliver, not too dissimilar to databases. So, I mean, you could say that one model is slightly better than this model in certain cases, but it's so early that it seems like it's a horse race. Every 3-4 weeks, somebody gets a better model out, and now it's compared to this model. That model's better in this. And so I think when you choose it, it's more around support infrastructure. What's going to be your what you're comfortable with? Like if you're comfortable with open source and taking a lot of that energy on your own to support it, versus would you rather be part of a bigger community of support, something that's more established like OpenAI? But that's the foundational part of the cake. The few things that I would basically, kind of earmark for decision making is you definitely want to look at price. So if you are looking at doing a high volume of inquiries, or you're doing more, for example, training, if you're going to be doing hardcore training or even hardcore inference. So, there's a big difference between deploying a live chat on your website that might do 800, 1,000, 2,000 conversations versus taking, let's say, 3 million records in a database and running it through an inference, because your cost is going to be way higher for that, for example, because you're going to get killed with that on OpenAI, but you might not get killed with that if you deploy out something that's more open source or build out your own model, like with a Pinecone. So I would look at transactional costs. That's something that software developers don't necessarily by default think about. Obviously, with cloud services, you have some of that, but it's not at the transaction level. It's not at the token level like models are. So I would highly suggest looking at price. The second thing is, if you're looking at potentially embracing other infrastructure, like you already are on the Google Cloud network or cloud infrastructure, you're already on the Microsoft Azure, infrastructure, et cetera, that might have might want to look at different pros and cons to using whatever model. Now, what's cool about both cloud infrastructures, or all cloud infrastructures, they've been pretty open about embracing all models. So even though you might be on the Google Cloud,
for the
infrastructure like we are, we still use, they have a model garden. You can still use OpenAI. You can still use other models. So you're not really restricted, but there are certain services native to Google within their infrastructure that are specifically used for Gemini that aren't necessarily available for other models. So if you like certain services and want to do that integration early on, you might choose Gemini model for that, or you might use OpenAI because they might have something that's more, that features and functionality that Google doesn't have. So I think that element of integration is important. And then finally, I think, this is really just more of a best of breed decision, is like, which one do you feel is going to be the most innovative and provide the most value down the road 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And again, I kind of mentioned earlier that they're all kind of converging on very similar functionality. And that's true from a model perspective. But as we get into things like inference and reasoning and memory, you might want to kind of just take a look at those different roadmaps that each one of those have. And so that you're not necessarily putting yourself in a situation where you're like, man, we were about to deploy a voice application. We need to get this live in 6 months. Well, OpenAI is probably ahead of the game on that versus others. Right. So you might want to embrace OpenAI because of your specs. So those are the three things I think I would look at from that first layer of the cake. You've seen this with customers. I mean, you can talk about, like, customers are not necessarily even thinking about or even understand what models are. So I think you've probably had a few conversations that you could probably share around the confusion in that layer.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough sometimes too, because when you come from a tech background, obviously not every single business is going to be tech forward, other than like, oh yeah, we installed this, maybe they have deployed Salesforce and like taken on that behemoth to like do all that stuff. And they're like, thank God we got this, because we're never going to do any more software like this again, which is usually not the case, because you grow your business and you need other things. With AI, it's kind of interesting that the rose-colored glasses that we've kind of started wearing is that AI, it has a very high ceiling and it can do so much. But like you were talking about, since we come from the data side and processing a lot of the stuff from like the machine learning space and querying all these databases, you forget that having a conversation, albeit is its own interaction and its own series of events that take place, doing that 1,000 times versus querying one database of 3 million, data points just once are significantly different projects. Yeah. So a lot of times someone will come in with, I would love to do X, Y, and Z. I'd love to build a support agent. I would love to help our sales team book more demos or close more deals or ask for referrals. And then you get the financial analyst or somebody on the backside that says, well, I would love to create an AI assistant that can take all of these different documents and standardize them and allow them for quick reference points to these specific teams, but only these specific teams. And it's like, okay, we'll pump the brakes. Yes, those are things you can do, but as we're talking about building foundation, is this something today that you need?
Yeah.
Is this something with voice that today you really want to deploy? Because yes, there are solutions, but if you wait 3, 6, 9 months, whatever you're trying to build is probably already going to be packaged in such a nicer box that does exactly or much closer to what you want to do.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a hard realization for a lot of businesses in that first step in, hey, where do I want to plant my flag for a foundational model? It's like, you can kind of have a wider spread right now, but you really want to make sure that wherever you're going down that lane, that they do have a vision for maybe getting you to these next benchmarks.
You're right. Yeah. And that's an excellent point about the the different ends of the spectrum, right? You have these very low hanging fruit type AI deployments, the live chat, the interfacing, the outbound sales qualification, kind of the stuff that we do on a day-to-day basis. And then you have the other extreme, which is a very unique, very particular, I've got these type of documents. I have thousands of them coming through my pipeline on a daily basis. I need AI to review these documents and provide all this information feedback. That's a completely different spec. So you want to choose a platform that does both, right? You don't want to hamstring yourself to say I choose this other thing over here, but then now I have to do this. I have to start over. Which brings us kind of
back into the SaaS issue where now I've put myself into multiple buckets. I've spread myself thin. And at some point you're going to have to, standardize those back down again. It's better just to kind of build with 1, 2, 3 tools that actually get you, the path you need.
And it's hard and that brings us to our third layer. So the third layer which sits on top is really this integration layer, right? It's the ecosystem that already exists in your business. And, we did it internally, even for our own company. And we talked about this last week, just internally. And, it's really, even for a small company like us, we have 14 different SaaS products that run our business, right? And it's probably very similar to any other company. And some companies might even have way more than that because of the size and because maybe they've acquired different legacy systems over the period of time. But as a brand new company, you're probably looking at 12 different systems, right? Everything from sales to support to finance to HR. And it may not necessarily be systems that you come in and out of on a daily basis, but certainly want to have the ability to integrate. So that third layer, the integration layer, is really where all the wiring is, right? So if you think about it, is before you can start building out your actual AI agent that you're going to have do a task or a role or a series of tasks, you have to make it easy for it to communicate in and out with your existing systems, whether it's calling an API to grab some information about a customer so that it can complete its task, or whether it's inserting a record into a spreadsheet, for somebody else to access later. So integration can happen on a document level, can be email, it can be calendars, setting appointments, but it can also be on a much deeper level. It could be updating your CRM customer record, drafting up emails, sending it out to clients. So it does range from small little things that take 5-minute tasks off people's desks to autonomy, right? Full autonomous functionality where it's triggered by a new customer and it goes through a series of 20 steps, updating all these different systems, records, and also communicating back and forth to different people like a person would do, right? So integration is key because you have to have that set up before you can start training your AI and telling your AI, oh, by the way, if you need a customer information, use this workflow. If you need to add a record to Google Sheets, here's your authentication to get into Google to do so. So it needs authentication. It needs a little bit of understanding of what it's supposed to do. And there's a lot of great platforms that are available at this layer. So we already talked about the foundational models and the kind of the big 4 or 5 that exist there. It's not too dissimilar here. Now, many people are probably, especially technology people have built out apps. These have been around for quite some time, right? Probably the most famous one is like Zapier, right? Or If Then Then That, or Make, or these are systems that people have been using for years, pre-AI. Obviously, AI is just another system at this point where you're hooking that in. However, there are some platforms that have actually taken a AI-centric approach and have come out of the woodwork. Things like Langflow or N8N, which is what we use, as the layer to connect to these third-party systems. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to pre-authenticate, right? Give access to the AI, because obviously it needs to log in, quote unquote, whether it be through a OAuth, kind of authentication process or through a service account. And this can be set up in a variety of ways depending on the application. But once you've kind of given that security layer and connected those dots, now you are ready to say, all right, now my AI can, if I needed to do this, I know exactly where to do this. And these layers, and you can always tell what products live on this layer because they basically look like very fancy flowchart type, software. It's box one, drag. I want if then this, and then box two, and then box three, connect this, and so forth.
Yeah, you're just diagramming out what the potential process is going to entail.
Yeah, exactly. And it could be very simple. It could be like when I get an email and it from this person, have it go here, have it generate some AI, summarization, scoring, and then send an email to this person. It could be literally just handing off 1, 2, 3 steps, or it could be
responsibility.
30, 40, 50 steps. I've seen workflows that are extraordinarily complex. But what's the beauty of this is that this is where AI meets your current ecosystem. Now, you could, if you didn't have an existing ecosystem, right? If you didn't have business applications, if you didn't have all these different SaaS products that you use to run your business, if you didn't have processes, email, calendars, all these things, well, then AI doesn't need that layer, and you could just live in the AI world, right? Which is what most people experience with ChatGPT. Like when you're on ChatGPT, there's no integration. It's literally just
there. It's
trained on the internet, and that's it. So it seems like very magical because you can ask it questions and it can come back with very fluid answers. But the minute you say, "Hey, send an email to Lee," or "Hey, put this in my HubSpot CRM system," or "Hey, send an appointment calendar to my Google Calendar," it can't do that. And the reason why it can't do that is 2 reasons. One, it doesn't have access, and 2, it doesn't have the infrastructure to build on that. Now, I don't know if companies like OpenAI and others are going to start to advance into that layer and build out tools, but the tools that exist today are very powerful, very mature, and even though it does require a level of technology, which is usually why we keep it away from our customers, we try to do it for them because it's like
take one thing off their plate.
Exactly.
There's nothing wrong with it, but absolutely.
Well, we try to come to the table with an end-to-end solution that kind of makes it very simple. So if there is connectivity that has to happen, and it's really kind of set up in the beginning, and once you set it up, you're pretty much golden. You don't really have to go back to it too much. But that layer is probably the one area, and we've talked about this in past pods, where it's like integration. We keep saying integration and training is where the inertia is, and that's why.
Are you guys listening? It's all about integration and training.
Exactly.
If this is the first time you're coming in, just forget anything else you heard. Integration and training is
exactly
the biggest,
because without that,
to climb.
AI is kind of alone, on a lonely island. So, so that third layer, and again, that there is a transactional cost to those layers. One of the reasons why. You would, again, choosing that layer, I would look at how complicated is your infrastructure, your business, and also which product you feel more comfortable with. So unless you're going with a company like us that does it for you, if you're going to embark on your own and choose a connectivity integration platform, you have simple ones, very easy ones to kind of play with like Zapier, but they tend to be more expensive if you're doing high volume. And then if you're doing something that you want to get a little bit more nitty gritty and get into the code and really have a lot more control and scale, then you might look at something like what we use, which is N8N. But it all depends on kind of the decision-making process. They're all very similar in the way that they operate. You connect your devices and then you tell it what to do and you create a flowchart, but it does require a little bit of thoughtfulness when you think about, okay, take the most complicated thing that you need to integrate with and then use that to measure against the platforms, because you don't want to end up building all these and then you get to the point where the most important piece that you have to connect can't connect. I highly suggest looking at that.
One thing about that too, I want to touch on is, and we always talk about how much training and integration and like what you can expose it to, not to play devil's advocate, but one trap that I do see a lot of clients, especially in early stages, get into is trying to expose too much that isn't relevant to the actual end goal. So without going into names and things like that, a few that we've worked with, have these pretty standard visions of, what I'm trying to do is take from, A to B. And we say, great, this is how you build that out. But then the integrations, because they know that it's important, they want to have, SharePoint integrated, and, they want stuff over here that comes in. And we always ask, like, is this relevant to this specific use case? And it's like, no, but down the road it might be. And I think that's the time where you do want to kind of throw the blinders on, both on you and the AI that you're trying to create here, to say, we have to make this task oriented. If this assistant, this agent, whatever you're building here needs to have access to these documents, do they need it all the time? Can they use it as, just like you were saying before, like inference training? Like, can they just call to it when it's referenced? Because that will drive up costs with training, with just usage of whatever model you're on, because of the brain that you're trying to build around literally just teaching it to pick up a cup and put it down.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't really need that.
Yeah. It gets even more, and you're exactly right. And it gets even more complicated because there is kind of a very clear distinction between workflow and integration, which is what we just covered.
Yes.
And what I would call, agent training and inference, because one is, I'm going to take the AI and I'm going to create a trigger. It's going to create an event, and it's going to go through a series of steps to get to some conclusion and then give it back the information. It's almost like, like a process, like making sausage, right? I'm giving it some basic information, and AI is going to probably help me in some steps, but a lot of that is just connecting the dots within your organization. That's not necessarily the best approach to actually fine-tuning and training your AI. That's a completely different approach. So, like we always use this analogy, like fine-tuning and training your model and your AI agent is like sending them to school. They're basically ingesting all of your information, all of your documentation, all of the knowledge base that you might have, and it's creating a model within that model, and it's able to speak and talk about it as if it was knowledge in their head. And that can be done without any integration, that's just chatting with the AI, just like you would chat with ChatGPT.
Yeah,
right?
just mental reps. You're building those in at this point.
Yeah, so the integration only comes in, and this is where it's very important to understand it, when to use the right tool, right? Because it is very much pick the right tool for the right job. Not everything's a nail. So when you're actually talking about, okay, now I needed to actually update a record in my database. Well, of course, that's workflow. That's application integration. I needed to query my calendar and tell me what appointments schedule, or what time I'm available to take an appointment. Well, that's a real time. And they call that, basically it's called RAG in the business, but basically it's essentially you're creating a little bit of an offshoot saying, hey, I'm talking with somebody. Oh, wait, I need to go query some a database. Okay, let me go there. And it's actually the best way you can, we always say this and somewhat dumbing it down, but just think about yourself, right? Like if I'm talking to you and we're just shooting, just kind of going back and forth. Hey, how's it going? How's your day? What's going on with this client? And then if I said, hey, Lee, can we talk? Can you meet with this client tomorrow at 3? What is, you don't know your calendar you haven't been trained on your calendar. So now what are you going to do? Yeah. You're going to go to Google Calendar, open it up and go, yeah, I'm available at 3. Right? That's exactly how AI works, right? There's some things it can keep in its mind, but the minute you start to want to
should keep in its mind.
Right.
Yeah,
but the minute you say, oh, I need a specific answer, or like, hey, do you have the phone number for that guy over here? Of course you don't know the phone number for that guy over there, right? So that, again, you query the
Take
CRM
our contacts,
system.
look at it.
Right.
Yeah.
But you know his name. You kind of know the context of the project. So there's certain things that you can train an AI on to give it context. But the minute you need that information, it's going to need that integration component. So you can get away with a lot, to your point. You can get away with a ton just through training and inference. But the minute you want to tie that back in, that's where it becomes important to have that integration layer. Which brings us to the second piece, which is, in our opinion,
I love how this cake has gone from 4 layers.
Like no, we're on third. We're on the. What I'm saying is we're on the second to the highest. So I guess third piece. So
I got to pause you for 1 second. If you could have any kind of cake, in the world, I'm going to take you out of AI and we're going to talk food. What is your go-to cake? If like someone's going to get you a birthday cake, what kind of cake do you want?
That's a good question. I mean, I know this is going to sound odd and weird, but I'm not a huge cake guy, but I've suddenly fallen in love with the gluten-free. I think my daughter makes them. My wife started making them.
Go.
It's like this weird, no sugar, no gluten, no anything, but
like a flourless cake.
It's like a weird. I don't know what it is, but they make it. They make cookies and cake out of it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I think it's just my palate has been completely devoid of taste. So it's like
yeah.
But now I can't even eat real cake because it's like too sugary. But yeah, that's my go-to. But how about you? What do you get?
Betty Crocker funfetti cake. Something about my inner child just needs that every once in a while.
That's a horrible answer.
I'm just saying, like, it doesn't have to be, but exactly.
This is why we're not a food show right now. Betty Crocker. So
I'm a basic man, Rich.
The third layer
of basic needs.
The third layer is what I like to call the kind of the agent management layer. It's probably a better way of describing it, but essentially, this is really where the newness comes into play, right?
Yeah.
We've had integration, we've had connectors for quite some time. We've always needed that, even for mobile apps or other apps that we might have built in the past. But now with agents, because it introduces a kind of a new dynamic, a new framework that's required in order to deploy agents at scale, and also to make sure that you can manage those agents on an ongoing basis.
Mm-hmm.
So this is obviously where we built out our system called Rhea. As our core focus, because it doesn't take much. I mean, now everybody's saying the same thing we've been saying for a year, so it's nice to see we're all beating the same drum, which is the bottom line is, and the first principles of where we are headed is every company is going to have thousands of agents at some point, right? And so big companies are going to have thousands. Maybe smaller companies might have 100 or so, but still, a lot of agents to deal with, right? Doing all these different small tasks, and as they come together, they kind of converge into a role, right? So, but you have to manage all these. You have to manage what LLM they're using. You have to manage what connectors they're using, what skills they have. You also have to manage the training, the inference. And of course, as these layers upgrade and as they get better and as new functionality comes to market, you're going to have to constantly upgrade and manage these, just no different than employees. So just like you have to manage your employees, you have to train your employees, you have to give them new tools in order to do their job better. Agents are going to be no different, except for you can do it at scale, and because it's programmatic. So, the key to the management platform is not just making it available to the technical folks on the IT to manage.
It's got to be accessible to everybody,
but it has to be simple to use on the business side. The business user has to be able to go in there and say, "Hey, I want to create an agent because I want to analyze some PDFs, or I want to take this notes from this meeting, or maybe I'm a project manager and I want to create a summary doc of this week's progress, or maybe I'm a financial guy and I need to analyze some of these spreadsheets." Or it could be somebody who's more sophisticated and say, "No, I'm going to build out an agent to automate 30% of my job because a lot of these tasks I'm doing on a Monday morning don't need me to do it. I can have an agent do it." So the management layer is really about bringing the power of AI in the form factor that they are used to, right? Like something that's very easy to put together. No different than, like, I would call it like the new Microsoft Office, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. It's like when you give the power of the spreadsheet, the power of the word, of the word editor, and the power of
PowerPoint,
exactly. It's like giving your people the tools to communicate to better do their job. But this would be even more powerful. And of course, it has to be able to tie to those other layers. And that's one of the things that makes it, that's where you start to see the separation of where I think the future is really going, and where maybe there's a lot of false profits that are happening, and a lot of false starts that are coming out into the market, where they're trying to tie this really critical functionality to an old legacy SaaS mindset. And when you strap it and you connect it to a singular SaaS solution, you're already losing, because what you're basically doing is you're saying, all right, I'm going to assume that everything that I need is going to be done by this one company, and I'm not going to have any control over my model. I'm not going to have any control over my connectors, and I'm not going to have any ability to really maximize the return on AI. I'm going to solely trust that this one SaaS company is going to be able to innovate at the scale and at the customization
Yeah.
that I need. And it's
Well,
it's
you've
a
also
it's a failed
I was gonna
strategy.
say, no, for sure, because you've put limitations on a tool that is supposed to remove limitations.
And it's not even us
you
preaching
run
this
into a
like,
wall.
and it's not even us being self-serving here. Just
No.
look at any company. We just started this podcast saying what? We're a small company. We have 14 SaaS companies. So it's already the history tells us the truth, which is no one company can do everything the way that we want it. And as much as we'd like to see that there's one SaaS that does everything for us, it's just not possible. And so no different than agents. You're not going to have one type of agents. Now, nobody's saying that you can't dabble and have a couple agents on this SaaS, a couple agents on that SaaS, maybe use a couple of agents, co-pilots within your Google Workspace, whatever. But when you're talking about the future of your business, you're going to want to have control over building out customized AI agents that you have full control over your model so that it's trained on your business, so that you can scale and optimize and deploy these solutions at your behest, right? That you're not restricted, that you're not tied down. And also there's a price component to it as well, which we've talked about in the past, that you want to make sure that you control costs, because there's no reason to deploy. I kind of joke about it, like Salesforce was released, or, kind of talked about releasing their Agent Force recently. And I looked at their pricing and I'm sitting there going, they're basically charging the same as what an employee would cost. It's almost ridiculous. They're taking a cut of this or doing like a few bucks per transaction. It's ridiculous. Their pricing's so high. I'm like, what's the point? Like, just have a human do it. Keep doing it, right? There's no value there. And it just creates more tech complexity, which is obviously what in their best interest, to charge more money, more per seat, et cetera. So I think you want to create
a stickiness to it, but
My point is, like, you've got to be conscious of like that there are different paths that are being forged, and some are of better interest to the SaaS companies that want to sustain and hold on to their seat licensing versus the future, which is agents. And when you talk about having 1,000, 10,000, I mean, the guy from NVIDIA talked about having millions of agents. Obviously, he's not going to pay $60 a seat license for those agents. He's building those internally, but he's going to get millions of dollars in ROI from that, billions probably, because he took that approach. And then the final layer, which I was just going to
say, like, going from where you're at with platforms and empowering people, like, that really just gets back to that user piece. Is actually, what are we doing? Not just us, but what should someone be looking for in the design or like the usability of some of these platforms, just to make sure that, like, again, employee satisfaction is key.
That's right.
But you're not going to go to a temp agency and hire a CEO to run your company.
Exactly.
Like, you're going to, you need to have an actual,
this final layer,
something to step in on that.
Yeah. This final layer is probably the most important, but it's actually the most simple. And the reason why it's the most important is because all that other stuff, if you build the final layer, is what the kind of the icing on the cake too, is if people don't use it, you're just wasting your time. So you could build the best foundation model, have the best foundation model, spend tons of time training it, building out connectors, having everything working, have a great management platform that makes it super easy to build out agents. But if the interface that you provide your end user is not what they use, is not usable, if they don't like it, then
doesn't matter.
Yeah, then you're screwed, right?
Yeah,
which is another reason why we always say, like, start with the user, start with the business user first before you invest all this energy and time building out or even selecting. You can build really cool applications for very little money, for very little time, pilot some things before you go down the road too far. So there's really 4 basic interfaces that I think are really where most people are going to use AI. And it's not anything that's like prophetic or even, for that matter, a smart answer, but it's really obvious, which is, and they all work the same way, right? It's all chat. It's all chat, right? So you're going to have everything that humans are used to using is what's going to work, right? Don't reinvent the wheel, right? So you have SMS, that's a no-brainer. And I would just put messaging. So SMS, WhatsApp, Slack,
Discord,
Teams, Discord. I would put all those into messaging. Easy, right? And then you have email. Again, you could almost put that into messaging as well. It's a little bit different because I do think email provides A little bit of there's a lot more there to unpack as far as what the capability is, but yeah,
it's gap and relevance too. You don't need to have it
same
immediately.
thing, right?
That's messaging needs to be one-to-one. Let's go.
And the other component, which I think is really what ChatGPT led on, and I think everybody else has their own flavor of, is this concept of Copilot. I consider ChatGPT, even though it's called ChatGPT and it's a much everybody's familiar with that interface. I think of it as a Copilot. It's what it really is it's a standalone Copilot that I use. If I need something or if I need to help me like craft a document, summarize something, do some research, whatever I might need. It's my Copilot, right? Now, Google has their Copilot, embedded in their, workspace into their apps.
Yep.
Microsoft has their Copilot embedded into their workspace and their apps. But what you're finding out is that even that, a lot of people are negative on because they don't like the experience. They prefer the purebred ChatGPT experience, which is very interesting to me because you would think like, oh, I'm in my email application. It's so much easier if I can just toggle over Gemini. But I find myself never doing that. And I think I share that. A lot of people share that same concept because it's so difficult to change user behavior. People don't underestimate that. And so you want to embrace the user behavior people are actually using, which is why our Copilot app with Rhea is basically a mimic.
Feels a lot.
It's literally a clone of ChatGPT. The only difference is you're accessing the agents that you build instead of one generalized LLM like ChatGPT.
Yeah, and having the security with that.
And then the final
internal things.
Yeah, and then the final piece is like a live chat that's external facing, right? Like, and I think that's going to scale into a new form of how a website will interface with people. I think that's the one shoe that hasn't dropped, which is what's the new website going to look like? It's not going to necessarily look like ChatGPT because you still want to have the branding, you still want to have your experiential, you want to have your visuals of what your company wants to tell a customer or prospect. But I do think the live chat, which is typically kind of shoved in the corner and kind of ignored, is gonna start to permeate into the actual user experience. That I think
speak directly to the brand, the product, the company versus a representative of that. Like,
I think it's only a matter of
deeper dive might work.
Yeah, it's only a matter of time. In fact, this is something we're looking at right now and deploying in our website, which is it's going to go from the live chat, which you have to click on the icon on the bottom right to load it up like a little chat icon, to actually be the primary UX of the website. Still have all the other cool stuff that you want. People can still navigate like the old way, but the idea of having something that's navigating with you and walking you through, but it's not too clippy and it's not too like in your face, that you can kind of and I think again that shoe is yet to drop, but I think that's where some innovation is going to happen.
Instead of searching for information, you're requesting information to be provided to you on what you actually
maybe it's
want.
Prompting you based on what you're kind of looking at too. I think it's going to get really cool. I think it's going to kind of like when you're it's like, hey, let me just tell you about this or that. So I think take
websites are dead in 2025. That's Rich's.
Well, definitely. I think nav bars and scrolling and the complexity of navigation, which is really nobody ever clicks on everything. So I definitely think outside of like obviously very specific apps like Amazon or eBay, Craigslist,
but a general website, the pages that are all there are 95% completely.
People just want to either go for the phone number or whatever. Yeah. So
contact page, pricing. Yeah, that's it.
But I think that
interesting.
I think that gives people kind of a little bit of a better understanding of the 4 layers and some of the decision making they have to do. There's obviously a lot more technical complication and a lot of nuances and a lot of edge cases that come into play. But I think it's important because I think before businesses start really saying, I am ready to deploy AI, what's my next step? What do I need to do? They really should draw that 4-layered cake. They should put all the things
16-layer cake from your description.
Exactly. Whatever it takes. It's not Betty Crocker, but it's, gluten-free.
4 ingredients, Rich, you get a delicious cake. But, might have too much sugar, but it is what it is.
Yeah, but like literally draw it up and say like, okay, what's our first layer? What's our second layer? What's our third layer? And that is your scope. That is your blueprint for success. Forget everything else. Everything else, honestly, is just a distraction. It's a red herring. It'll take you down a road that you do not want to go down. It'll be hard and expensive and ugly and disappointing. You have to stick with exactly where everything is going. And if you kind of get dismayed and try to build something on your own in any one of those layers, you're going to get you're going to get run over. You should focus on the uniqueness of what you want to build, the training of your model, the collecting the information in your processes that make you unique. Do not try to rebuild and restructure, because it's complicated, it's hard, and it's fast moving train. Every day that goes by, something new comes out, and it's only more effort to kind of keep up with the Joneses. So the more you embrace that foundational cake, the more you can just be the icing and the sprinkles and the whipped cream and all the good stuff that I know that you enjoy, Lee.
That Rich doesn't put on his.
That I do not put on that.
Exactly, right? Well, thank you all for joining us on this episode. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button to stay in touch. Also, check out our Substack for more content, which will be linked to this episode to continue the discussion. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care, everyone.
Takes the flow.